Hey, folks, it's Nate. It's time I got back to the drawing board. I wanted to continue my series on character designs. I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about non-human character design. But in order to talk about that, since I don't design non-human characters very often, I was going to use something else. I want to talk a little bit about um, the Pixar and their visual language of characters and how they applied it to non-human character design, and then talk a little bit about how I think about it, because while I don't do it much, I do it a little, and some things you should think about as you're designing non-human characters. So for starters, the Pixar in-house visual language for men and women is different from mine. For their male characters are always very blocky. You can kind of see that here with Carl. And their female characters tend to be very rounded. And unfortunately, I can't find my copy of The Incredibles. Otherwise, I'd be using that. But if you look in the character designs of The Incredibles or even Inside Out, you will see the same thing. Male characters are very blocky. Like Fear in Inside Out, he is like pipe cleaners and 2x4s. Basically, that's his shape. Whereas the female characters in that are very rounded. They're smooth and flowing. And you see the same thing in the characters of The Incredibles. So that's their basic visual language to cue people into whether a character is male or female. So when we move on to look at some of their non-human characters, look at the character designs from Monsters Inc. Sully, again, look at that giant rectangle for a head. It's basically all it is. It screams, this is a dude, because Sully is a male character. He's a father figure to Boo, and he's the bro to Mike Wachowski. So yeah, very, very strong signaling there. Now Mike is not quite as strong, but he's still quite blocky. If you look at the basic shape there, of course he's a little more triangular than rectangular, but he still has that very strong blocky shape. Whereas the two female characters, they are very rounded, again flowing, in both cases, as a slug or as a one-eyed Medusa, I guess that is. Kind of drawing a blank on the side character names, but and then of course the villain of the piece, he kind of exists in a weird nebulous zone. And this is one of the things that works better for non-human characters and for human characters. He's very, kind of off-putting because he has that flowy feel, but his head is very blocky. And of course, he has those sharp, pointy teeth, lots of hard edges, which is not quite the same, but kind of implies a bit of a masculine element to him. So he has kind of a mix of characteristics. And so, yeah, that's their visual language applied to monsters. And of course, they also applied it to robots. Of course, this is Wall-E. And here we have Wall-E himself is literally a cube. So yeah, very, very blockish. And of course, he is the male robot, quote unquote, in the romance between himself and Eve. And Eve is, of course, essentially an oval. Again, very smooth, very flowing, rounded edges, no hard edges. And so that she is the female character, and in the romance between the two of them. And so they have well set up, just with the way their characters are designed, to signal to you the parts that will be played in the story they are telling. So I think that at the heart of it is a testimony of the power of slowly building up that visual language to communicate wordlessly things about your characters to your audience. Of course, there are more than just Wall-E and Eve as non-human characters in here. Otto is an interesting example of a character who is completely inhuman. His shape as a wheel is kind of symbolic of that. He is extremely inhuman. He doesn't even have a face. Of course, the light at the center of the wheel is almost an eye, but not quite. he doesn't always, look at you and address you directly that way. So he can be a very eerie kind of inhuman character with his lack of distinct attributes, and that's one of the things that's you can also do, and you have to keep in mind when you're designing non-human characters. Now, when I design non-human characters, they tend to be living creatures still. So here's a quick sketch I did of just a couple of dragon heads, not even the whole bodies, and to communicate very quickly, you can see again the basic shape for a male character is a triangle, and so the male dragon's head is very, very pointed in the way it is shaped. The horns point straight out, and the head is more pronounced in how blocky it is. The female form is a little more rounded to conform to that diamond shape. The horns curve inward some to create a more streamlined shape that fits into that basic profile. And you can do similar things with the bodies. Now, when you're deciding a non-human character, it's very important to ask yourself, do I want the audience to be able to empathize with this character on some level or another? If you do, it's important that they have a face somewhere. It doesn't have to be a very complicated face, like these dragons have eyes, nose, mouth. Although I didn't draw that in, they would have a mouth. Whereas in the case of Wall-E, the characters are basically eyes, but that's really all you need. The human eye can be very expressive, and of course in Wall-E, as you watch that movie, the robot's eyes are also very expressive. So there needs to be something like a face that can produce something that the human mind will recognize as an expression. It needs to be able to move and flex at least a little bit upwards and downwards as the corners of the mouth or as eyebrows. And really finding those, at least one of those two elements, and preferably both, is the key to a non-human character that the audience can empathize with. Beyond that, it can really be any shape you want. It can be a cylinder, it can be a perfect circle, it can just be a blob, it can be an octagon. You could have a stop sign with expressions, if you really want to do that. It can be just about any shape as long as it has the basic shape of eyes or a mouth or both. And you can create a certain amount of empathy between that character and your audience. Now, if you want your non-human character to have no empathy, remove both of those traits. And allow me to emphasize, it has to be both. Or you could have one of those traits, but not have them ever move, because expression is in the way the shape of your mouth and your eyes changes. So, like this little guy, I don't remember if he ever has a name, but the basic shape of his eyes never moves, and that makes him much more of a one-dimensional character. Of course, he's in the movie. He's animated very expressively, but he's very flat. He's very one-dimensional. I mean, he just really thinks about keeping the ship clean, right? So he never thinks about anything else. He is much more of a robot than Wall-E or Eve are, and I think part of that is the fact that he never really changes his expression. He does kind of try and comfort Wall-E when they're stuck in the garbage chute, but anyways, if you do want to create a distant, difficult to empathize with character, take away eyes, take away the mouth, and you can even leave other aspects of a human face, like the nose or the basic outline. You can even put hair on it, but with no eyes and with no mouth, it will still feel very alien and distant, or at the very least, it will seem imperturbable or unknowable, because the basics of human expression are in those two parts of the face. So I guess beyond that, I have, since I don't design a whole lot of non-human characters, I don't have as much thought put into the kinds of signifiers that would signify things about their character, um, about their um, about their flaws or about their habits put into it. And part of being non-human is not signaling those things in the same way as others as humans do. So as you are designing non-human characters, the one last thing I would keep in mind is don't use quite the same signifier. Like they should be similar but not the same. For example, and do I have it here? I don't think I do. When I was talking about male character designs, I pointed out that Alexander Maxwell had hooks on his gloves and his boots, not only as something he could fight with and to serve as a weapon and a tool to help him climb, but also to indicate that he had a cruel streak to his personality that could really hold him back when he, in some situations. Um, I would not use that in non-human characters as a sign of cruelty. Not only because to maintain that distinction, but because um, a claw is something that would occur naturally in a non-human character. So if you were drawing, say, a dragon or a reptile or even a dog or a cat or a wolf or what have you, claws would be a natural part of the character design. So you would have to find something else to serve as that indicator of cruelty. Um, Likewise, a haughty nose, you can't really put that on a lot of non-human characters, so you can't indicate pride that way. So non-human characters require a lot more thought put into their design as compared to human characters, because you frequently cannot use the same language as you can for humans. So put a lot of thought into your non-human characters. Think about how you could partially adapt some of your visual language, but also be aware that you're going to have to use some of those basic shapes in the construction of your non-human characters, just because of what they are. So yeah, that's about all I wanted to say tonight. There's a like button and a subscribe button down below. Use them as you see fit, and I'll talk to you later.